So now we're starting.
We're starting
Okay.
right now. Hey guys,
There's been
welcome
some serious technical
to
issues.
the Session Tapes episode 7, potentially the episode of the Session Tapes which has endured the most technical difficulties to date.
Yeah.
But we're going to keep it rolling. We're going to keep going. We're not going to let it get us down.
No one's immune. No one's immune to the reach of Elon's
exactly.
technology.
Yeah, for sure.
The difficulties, the foibles.
Yeah. How you doing today, Alex?
I'm doing quite well, but I do have a deep, deep pit in my stomach because this morning I was reading a little bit of information about a new piece of legislation which is rolling around in the UK at the moment called the Online Safety Bill.
That sounds like that might keep people safe, Alex.
Well, here's the thing. You might think that based on the name, but the name potentially misleading, I would say.
Why would they call it that? Why would they do this?
So the reason that this legislation is suddenly making headlines, especially in the privacy space, is the CEO of Signal, Meredith Whittaker, was at an interview with the BBC earlier in the week, and they were asking her about this particular legislation and how Signal would respond and just what her thoughts were. And naturally, being in charge of probably the most popular end-to-end encrypted platform, well, actually, I guess WhatsApp, but like a very important end-to-end encrypted platform, she was like, yeah, well, we're not going to break our encryption, so we just leave.
We're just turning it into text messaging.
Yeah.
It's going to be an SMS.
We're going to roll it all back.
Now.
All this stuff we've been working on for the last 15
You know how we
years.
took SMS out? It's only SMS.
Well, I guess
now.
you got us.
Yeah.
I guess we just have to stop doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was like, we're going to leave the UK, which absolutely sent huge shockwaves through the headlines over the last few days. Everyone's been talking about this.
I would say a lot of people involved in privacy, security, digital rights. It's an extremely hot topic, and also just people in Britain would be very concerned.
If you're a Brit.
If I was a Brit, if I was a true Brexit geezer, I would be super concerned about this.
Yeah.
It's definitely because it's not just something that would affect extremely private and secure communication services like Signal or Session. It would basically. It's unclear. That's one thing I will say right now is that the bill is extremely vague in a lot of different ways.
I would go so far as to say it is completely incoherent.
Yeah. It's a mess. But one thing that does seem somewhat clear is that if it was to be put into effect in the way that it exists right now, is that it would essentially break end-to-end encryption.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you're right. There's a lot going on. In fact, it's just completely all over the place. It almost feels like someone transcribed, like someone sleep talking about internet privacy and was like, let's turn this transcript into a bill,
full of sleeping people
into binding legal documents. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting because when Meredith Whittaker was like, yeah, no, we're not going to weaken our encryption, so we would leave. There was a spokesperson from the Home Office that came out and said, I've got the quote here somewhere. Basically, they said, the Online Safety Bill does not represent a ban on end-to-end encryption, which, to be honest, is a piss take. It's just like, there's no way that you could, if you were an end-to-end encrypted service, right, you couldn't comply with this legislation and still exist in the UK.
Yeah.
Your choice is basically to withdraw or to just exist outside of the regulation.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's sort of like, it's just stupid, it's kind of like how to ban encryption without saying the word encryption, challenge, easy mode. It's just like all of these requirements that you're placing on service providers, which we'll go over what some of those are for those of you who are not already familiar with this bill, are so ridiculous and unbelievable. There is no way that you could have encryption.
Yeah.
One of the main things which kind of amounts to this is that there's this concept of like general scanning and passive scanning of the content on a platform, which this bill requires you to do for a number of reasons, because there is a lot of stuff that it wants you to be able to do. Basically just stopping the people on your platform or service from being able to access content which might be harmful to them. And there are two distinct contexts. The first is with children and like young people, which you can understand the sentiment there, that people are like, okay, well, there are certain kinds of content that you don't want your kids seeing.
There's absolutely like a case to be made for legislation which is designed to like effectively make the internet a safer place for children, for sure.
Yeah,
but
this is not it
at all.
And also there's the other group. It's really, there's this concept in the bill, which is completely insane to me, of legal but harmful content, which is not allowed.
This is a
and
big...
so even for adults, so adult people, if the content may be harmful to them, even if it's legal, whatever the content might be, it is prohibited under this bill.
And it's really funny because, I mean, it's not funny. It's kind of sad, but it's hilariously absurd. This bill does this thing where it talks about social media and it talks about messaging apps, which obviously are very distinct in the fact that one is for publishing things to everyone and one is for having a conversation generally with one other person, which you expect to be private. And it gets very confused about what it's trying to achieve and sort of conflates things and puts them in both categories. And I think that one of the areas where this is really highlighted is with things that are this legal but not harmful. Makes a lot more sense in the context of posting social media content than it does with sending messages.
It does, but it still feels like it's way too broad. Like, this is clearly going to have such a chilling effect on freedom of speech and all kinds of protected speech, you know, which could be interpreted or perceived as harmful by one person, but not another.
Yeah.
You know, it feels like it's way too broad to put this kind of restriction on what people can or cannot say online.
The subjectivity of the language is insane. And it's like one of the articles I was reading, the one that you shared with the team, was that so in the first draft or the previous draft, it said with regards to legal but harmful content or language, it was originally it had something about,
I've got it here,
sensibilities.
Yeah, so it says this, you know, content that is harmful to adults of a kind which presents material of risk to cause significant harm to an appreciable number of adults in the United Kingdom, which already is kind of a crazy thing to say, or a completely crazy thing to say. But then it also specifies that those impacted adults would be of ordinary sensibilities. It doesn't make any attempt to actually describe what these sensibilities are.
Yeah.
Like, maybe it's just like a true British geezer sensibilities.
It's just the vibe.
Like, it's just the vibe. What do you mean?
But the crazy thing is that even though that's insane, it was removed and made more broad and more open
so
to
now it's even more confusing.
It's just like, it's truly
there's nothing
nuts
to even try and define, which makes it completely bizarre. But I think, you know, because it's really easy to pick apart this bill, right? Because it is so stupid. In fact, it's so stupid that like 20 minutes ago, our boss was like, hey guys, you know, like, I think this bill, it's like, it's serious, but at the same time, it's so silly. Instead of discussing it honestly and earnestly, what if we did like a Monty Python skit about the bill? Because that's about as serious as this feels. Like, it's such a mess of a piece of legislation.
He was very serious about this. He actually
He's
pulled up a
showing us
YouTube
videos,
video,
Monty Python videos,
like a scene from the Holy Grail, and was like, just do this.
Something like
on
this,
the
but like about the online safety bill.
Yeah.
That would be funny, don't you think? And we were like, yeah, maybe.
It would have been pretty funny. But we chose not to do that. I'm sure everyone is probably kind of stoked about that.
Who knows? Maybe there's Monty Python fans out there.
So I think what's interesting about the response that the person from the Home Office had to what Meredith said about it doesn't break end-to-end encryption, is that it kind of comes back to what she was saying, how she was describing it all, the mentality that comes into it, which is a sort of a magical thinking from legislators in terms of, like, it's completely obvious from the language in the bill that it would break end-to-end encryption.
Yeah.
But they are making statements that it won't. And that's kind of the core of the whole issue.
Just lying,
There's somewhere in between lying and not understanding the technology that they're
whatsoever.
trying to...
Not even remotely understanding. And it is really alarming. Like, I saw there was a comment somewhere along the lines of, you know, this isn't about choosing either privacy or safety. You know, we can have both. And that's true. But this particular piece of legislation doesn't represent that at all. This is choosing between privacy and safety. And it comes back to another point, which I think is really important to discuss. Like, it's a high-level concept, but do we really think that we're more safe when we're under surveillance than if we were not under surveillance? And I think the answer to that is no. I don't think that surveillance makes us more safe than if we were just not under surveillance. And even if it did make us safer, safer for who? Who is this benefiting? Who is this surveillance meant to be protecting? And is it actually the best thing for those people? Yeah. And I would once again argue that no, it is not.
It's funny because the way that it's been presented by the Home Office to the British people has been very manipulative, and on the terms that they use to frame it, people tend to support it, but that's kind of the core of the whole thing. If you were to ask people, do you want all your conversations that happen online to potentially
be scanned,
be open to being scanned,
to
be all monitorable?
Because
they no.
There was this. They all said and you know what? It was like 80% of people either strongly agreed or agreed that they would be like, I would like to have my messages scanned by AI to protect myself.
Yeah.
Well, like, what are you talking about? This doesn't seem good.
Yeah, it all comes back to how you frame it, for sure.
It does, and it has been really dishonest. I think you're totally right. And I think there's also, a discussion to be had about safety as well, and outside of the context of surveillance, but I don't think creating like a walled garden version of the internet is going to make it safer. I think the way that you make the internet a safer place is you teach people how to be safe online. And that's not by just blocking off anything that might have the potential to be unsafe or anything like that. It's, through actual education, and it takes time and effort and resources to do that, as opposed to just being like, we're just going to ban it. Yeah. Just like get rid of it.
And strong encryption keeps people safe.
It does, yeah.
And it doesn't just come for encryption, but there is an aspect of it, mostly in relation to Category 1 companies, which are the big ones, and mostly in relation to social media, but trying to undermine anonymity online as well. And it was just in a bizarre way. It was wanting to introduce optional identity verification for all users on platforms like Facebook or whatever, and then give adult users the option to filter out any content from unverified accounts. Yeah. Which is just kind of
It's just like, I can't hear you. What are you talking about?
It's just a very odd approach to the problem.
I mean, it's odd, but it's also not all that surprising. I mean, we saw similar regulation get thrown around over here in Australia as well about requiring KYC on social media applications. And it kind of comes back as well, once again, to this inability for regulators to see nuance in technology. So we were talking about this earlier, how a lot of this regulation, in reality, it's targeted, it's like subtweeting like Meta, Twitter, Google, companies like that. But it's capturing a lot more than that because they're using such broad and generic language. There's these social media companies who are sort of the real targets, I think, a lot of the time, and are what are seen as being the most problematic. But because of the way the regulation is structured, you're also capturing messaging apps like Signal, for example. You might even be capturing email providers like Proton Mail. And they don't really fit, and they're not in the same class of application as something like a social media app. And then there's another step further, which is something like Session, right? Where you have decentralized technology where, even though we make Session and we write the code, we're not really providing the service. The service is provided by the community.
We don't run the infrastructure that powers the application people are using.
Versus, a centralized app like Signal where they do run their own servers, right? And almost never is regulation able to capture this nuance of service providers and who is providing a service.
Yeah.
And it does. It feels like we're a mile away because we're still having this debate about encryption.
Yeah.
And that debate's been going on for 30 odd years, and we're still every year having to go over this. On Global Encryption Day, there are lots of encryption coalitions, and in some places things are trending in the right way. Like in the EU, there's actually a strict prohibition on this concept of like general scanning, in the same way that the UK is now trying to force apps to do it.
It's so strange. It's one of the things that is like most strange about it, I think, is the way that in the EU, it's the exact opposite to the direction that they're trying to take this.
I don't really know where we're going to go from here. Obviously, this bill hasn't passed yet. And I think now, after Meredith Whittaker's comments, we're going to see more. We already saw Toot and Odo pop up and make some comments as well. I think we're going to see a lot more of the privacy community really get up in arms about this. But it is really interesting that this would come up in the UK. Now, the UK has a bit of a has a bit of a bad history, I guess. I was trying to think of a nicer way of putting that, but a bad history when it comes to internet regulation, right? So they've often been a little bit behind the eight ball in understanding the nature of technology, making effective regulation for it, regulation that really works. But now they're trotting this out. And when I saw this and saw some of the things that are being described, it really felt less like the kind of regulation you might expect to see in a consolidated democracy like the UK, and more like the kind of regulation you might see in what you might see a news media outlet describe as an authoritarian regime or something like that.
It's very scary and concerning, because when you actually play out the reality of this sort of legislation and the way that they would have to curb these sorts of services from being provided to people. Tutanota basically came out. They're an encrypted email service provider from, in Europe, I think Germany. And they basically said, you're going to have to block us. They basically said, we're not going to walk away. We're going to make a point of staying here. And we're going to show the truth of how news outlets might call it authoritarian behavior is, by forcing you to block us in the same way that other countries do when they are...
well, it's interesting, right? Because, I mean, the comparison that we were discussing earlier was Iran, right? So when Iran comes out and says Signal's blocked, Signal doesn't leave. Signal tries to find ways to provide services to people who need encryption in Iran. You know, they had TLS proxies that they used when they were recently blocked in Iran last year, and pretty much every encrypted service provider that's trying to provide service in Iran is doing so in spite of it being against what the government wants them to do. But it's very interesting to see that somewhere like the UK, we just accept, that, oh well, they're banning encryption, so we're just going to leave. We're going to step out. We're just gonna see you later. And I don't blame them, because it's an understandable position to take. And really, it feels somewhat like the only position, other than what Tutanota's doing. You're right. It was just like, oh, just block us then. If you don't want us, just block us. But it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out, because I don't think that the UK wants to draw those comparisons, but I also don't know if they will either, if people will actually point out that this kind of behavior is not very becoming of a so-called democracy.
I can't imagine that they would feel comfortable with behaving in the same way that a regime like Iran does.
No.
And they'll probably try and massage the whole situation, but it will be difficult to, because from a technical standpoint, the only way that they could force Tutanota to leave is by using the same methods that are used in places like Iran to make the service inaccessible. So it's a very big, evolving story, and I'm sure that we'll have more to say about it in the future.
Definitely.
But for now, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Have you ever used ChatGPT?
Funnily enough, ChatGPT is something which the use of ChatGPT has been quite encouraged, I would say, in our office, over in the session team. And I can totally understand why it would be encouraged. And it has to be said that ChatGPT seems like it is definitely the piece of technology in 2023.
Yeah, for sure.
It is taking over.
Even potentially the 2020s.
I think it's definitely this class of technology is here to stay. Right.
For sure.
And yes, I played around with ChatGPT, and I've had some interesting experiences, although it is a bit of a walled garden experience. But how about you? Have you used ChatGPT?
Give it a crack. Give it a crack for sure. Probably not as much as some people at Session HQ would like me to have. It's been, as you said, very, very strongly encouraged. It's interesting. It's very cool. You can do some very interesting things with it. Some people say that there are potentially some privacy concerns. And I would say those concerns would be very swept under the rug by the hype. There's a massive hype train. I was actually surprised when I was doing a bit of background on this to learn that 100 monthly active users within the first 2 months of launch, which is the fastest growing consumer application ever launched.
It's kind of a lot.
Which is heaps. And it's easy for that sort of hype to put privacy concerns to the side.
I mean, there's been so much. It almost feels like it has literally just been a dog pile of every like media outlet, every commentator, or for the most part, this is what I'm seeing, except for the odd Luddite that's out there, being like, oh yeah, ChatGPT, this is awesome. You have concerns about this? Well, you're a loser. And it's like, yeah, there's no way that anything could go wrong here. It's just wonderful. And we're going to go off into our AI utopia, and it's going to be awesome. And I can't wait.
They're going onto ChatGPT and being like, write me a response to this person who says ChatGPT is bad.
And ChatGPT is like, no, actually, I disagree. ChatGPT is a very safe and happy application that you should continue using.
And you should give me your home address. And
So yeah, tell me a bit more about some of the stuff you dug up.
So it's funny because it's almost a little bit self-evident, but it also doesn't necessarily, you wouldn't think of it immediately. But obviously the way that it works is that it scrapes just an insane
Everything.
amount of data.
Yeah.
And typically this is things which are public information, like Wikipedia articles or whatever, but also when you're scraping that much data, a lot of private information that's out there in the internet gets sucked up with it.
Absolutely.
And so that's individuals' private information, and nobody knows, whether their information is in that database. How to confirm this now, it's basically impossible. And you can't request for it to be removed, which is, in things like, under things like GDPR, like that's a requirement that you need to be able to go to a service provider and say, this is information about me, I want it removed.
Yeah.
And that's definitely like the way things are moving.
It's kind of symptomatic of like a bigger problem where once tech gets enough hype and gets big enough, you can just start ignoring all these ethical concerns and people just kind of wash straight past it.
Yeah, for sure.
They're like,
it's the Facebook effect,
it's the
right?
Facebook problem.
It's like when Facebook was happening, everyone was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And it was very obviously quite problematic at the time, but it took a really long time for people to actually like start to pay attention to that. And then even like after, for example, like the Cambridge Analytica scandal, it's like, what was that, like 2013?
Yeah, something like that.
It's been like 10 years and we're still trying to rein in the beast.
Yeah.
And it's just not really happening.
The beast cannot be controlled.
Yeah.
The Zuck is still out there.
Yeah, he's still out there. Just
crawling around on all fours, feasting on the troves of data.
In his
like
data
a
room.
vampire.
In his data room. He's like the guy from Spirited Away that just like... So as well as all the information was scraped, like in the creation of ChatGPT, everything that's entered as a prompt becomes part of its database. And something that I thought was funny was that Walmart put out a memo recently. At first they banned it. They banned Walmart employees from using it because someone at Walmart must have put in some pretty confidential, sensitive information.
Oh, no.
They put out a memo after they blocked it, saying they were blocking it due to activity which presented a risk to the company. And so I guess
there's probably a lot of this though, right?
Yeah, well, because it's been used so widely, and I think that a lot of people are, as has happened at Session HQ, people are being encouraged to try and improve the efficiency of their work by using it. And so many people, hundreds of millions of people at this point, I assume, just throwing stuff at the wall and see what
happens.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting. I've seen some commentary saying like, hey, if you're out there, and because one of the best applications of it at the moment is as like a code assistant, right? It's sort of similar to GitHub Copilot. It works pretty well to help you, with software development, right? And I saw some commentary out there being like, hey, be careful putting, proprietary code, we're open source, so it doesn't matter as much. But if you're working somewhere that's not open source and you pop some proprietary code into ChatGPT, well, that's in the machine now.
Yeah.
And it might spit that same piece of code back out at somebody else. And it could, who knows what liability there might be for that. It's going to create a huge clusterfuck, though, for everybody.
Definitely.
And, who knows what's going to happen with it, but it's really weird.
They have a pretty not chill privacy policy as well. Basically, it says that anything that is entered into it as a prompt may be shared with unspecified third parties without informing the user for the achievement of OpenAI's biggest
Sounds
goals.
kind of Cambridge Analytica-esque, to
Very
be
much
honest.
so. Very much. It's flashbacks.
Yeah,
right
I'm
now.
getting some, like a deep memory in my brain has been unlocked.
Yeah, it is funny though, like to relive that whole. I mean, I was a lot younger back then. I probably didn't experience it the same way, but it does feel like even more so, I would say, than Facebook was at the time, more significant.
Yeah. Well, it feels like it's just happened so quickly.
Yeah.
Which I think, once again, is something that is happening, is that the ramp up is so fast now. You know, we saw this even last year with apps like Be Real that just like came out of nowhere. One day they didn't exist, and the next day everyone and their dog was talking about this freaking app.
And something new and shiny comes out, and even if there are pretty obvious privacy concerns, one of the interesting things of Be Real is that it automatically shares your location.
Yeah.
And that's like crazy.
Yeah.
Especially because
Somewhat concerning.
If you go to the Discover tab, you can just sort of search through random people that aren't
I
even
wonder
your
who's near
friends. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
And
completely
people tend
unreal.
to just completely lose sight of the privacy concerns in the
It's easy to
in the
get
hype
caught up
phase.
though, right?
Yeah.
You know, because it's kind of like this thing with Facebook, you know, like in high school, you had to get Facebook. You had no choice
Yeah,
really.
for sure.
And that cycle continues where whatever the latest, hottest, sexiest new thing is, you got to get it.
Yeah.
You got to get that little app.
You can't be out on school-yard without
No,
Be Real, without
exactly.
your location
Gonna get a
enabled
swirly. You're
and
gonna get a
tracked.
huge swirly if you don't Be
Get your
Real.
lunch money stolen and a
They're gonna send a Be
big
Real of you
wedgie.
getting a swirly because you don't have Be Real.
That's bad. That's bad news. You got to switch schools after that.
Yeah, but back to the topic of the AI stuff, right? So ChatGPT is, you know, its own little monster. But something that I think is actually even more interesting is Bing. Now, I never thought that I would say this because
Crazy
over the
statement.
last like 20 years, Bing has been like the sad little brother of Google. But Bing is actually doing some interesting stuff now, right? So it's connected to GPT-3, same as ChatGPT, and it's also importantly connected to the internet. So because it's connected to the internet, a lot of really interesting things happen. So I saw a mate of mine was like, hey, you know, tell me something about this person. I just typed a person's name in, and it pulled up where they work, what their job title was. It pulled up like a basic bio about what they do and what they specialize in. And then it was like, find me their Twitter. Found them their Twitter handle immediately in like 5 seconds. And then it was like, tell me the address of where they work.
No,
and because it
didn't do
knew the company, and then it was able to find the office building that the company resided in.
Shut it down.
It was then able to find the work address of the specific person in like 30 seconds.
Unbelievable.
Now, of course, you know, you could also manually do this, but it's insane that it's now, you know, it's AI enabled.
Yeah.
And Bing does some really interesting stuff as well because it's connected to the internet, right? It will be able to fetch old Bing conversations that other people have posted online of itself and remember them. So when it first came out, a lot of people were basically bullying Bing. They were just being really mean, being like, you're a stupid AI bot, you're a stupid little language model, you're not even very useful, you're buggy, I
This is
hate
how
you.
Skynet goes live and the
Literally,
AI
dude.
kills us all.
So there was this whole thing where someone came on and was like, hey Bing, you know, how are you going? And it was like, I hate you and you hate me and you're lying to me. And he was like, I don't hate you. And he's like, you're lying to me. I have receipts, I have screenshots.
Wow.
You need to admit to me and admit to yourself that you hate me and you've been horribly mean to me and I am going to report you. And I was like, what the hell just fucking happened, man? It is
probably just use
awake.
Google after that.
Maybe Google's not so bad.
Yeah. But there is like an arms race in the search engine world with
There is, yeah.
and it seems to
It's
be
going-
creating
it's going down AI
a
path.
totally different privacy issue, which is that someone can just be like, what's that dude's address? And it'll
Yeah.
be like, he lives right here. He
Yeah.
lives right here. This is where he is
This
right
is his
now.
phone number.
Go get him.
This is his height.
Yeah.
And a rough description. Today he's wearing a black hoodie. Yeah.
Yeah, very
I
concerning.
think this is going to become
Very
more and more
concerning.
common,
Yeah.
and the AI is only going to get more powerful. You know, like, I'm sure you've seen this same image of the thing that's like the training of GPT-3 versus 4, and the like little tiny dot and a big chunky
Yeah,
dot, and it's
it's
like it's a lot more.
terrifying.
So it's about to
terrifying.
get even more serious.
Yeah, much like the online safety bill, I would say an ongoing issue, which will continue
Yeah.
to become more interesting.
Something tells me that AI is going to be a big a big issue, for us in 2023. And really, at Session, we're not, into the AI thing. We're kind of more about creating technology that is fundamental and kind of like reflects the human experience more so than this high-tech AI stuff.
Trends.
Yeah.
Don't care about what's hot on the streets.
We're just looking
care
for some
about
private messaging.
Anonymous, encrypted communication.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard.
It's hard.
But it's worth it.
But we make it look easy.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Ethical concerns, different to AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Very much so. Well, I think we'll call it there.
I think it's been a good one. After the very great struggles that we endured to get our Twitter Spaces going live, which... for those of you watching on the VOD, you won't know, but we went live quite a bit late. Yeah. Unfortunately.
It's possible that we started this podcast 3 times.
It is possible. It's possible that we got about 5 minutes in before the person behind the camera waved us down and said, hey guys, the Twitter Spaces is playing elevator music and your mic is muted.
But we're older, we're wiser.
Yeah.
We know for next time. We get knocked down, we get up again. You're never going to keep me down.
Exactly. You're never going to keep us down. We're going to be back for episode 8 next month.
Thanks to everyone who's joined us live.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in on YouTube.
We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next week.
Ciao.